2 months ago, the Detroit Tigers season was over. They were 7 games under 500 and they had just a 1% chance to make the playoffs. They traded away Jack Flaherty while Casey Mize and Reese Olson both headed to the injured list. 3 of their top starting pitchers were no longer present. However, the Tigers now stand with a record of 85-74 with a 96% chance to make the playoffs. This insane, improbable comeback was because of the pitching. How? They lost 3 of their best starting pitchers, but their pitching is the reason that they found success. In fact, since August, the Tigers have the best ERA in the league. This isn't just a good stretch, there is quite literally nobody better than them. Other than Tarik Skubal, there were no other notable names on this staff that would suggest these kinds of numbers. But this is not the result of some breakout talent. This is the result of the newest pitching strategy sweeping the nation. A strategy that's not only performed by the Tigers, but by other top-of-the-line pitching staffs in 2024. And with how successful it has been, it won't be long until the majority of the league is following suit. By the way, only 4% of you watching this video are subscribed, so if you enjoy the video, feel free to subscribe. It's completely free, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. First, we need to go back 10 years to the 2014 season. The Washington Nationals had built one of the best starting rotations since the turn of the century. Steven Strasburg, Jordan Zimmermann, Gio Gonzalez, Doug Fister, and Tanner Roark. If you look around the rest of the league's best pitching staffs, you will see similar types of builds. The Dodgers with Clayton Kershaw, Zach Greinke, Dan Herron, Hyunjin Ryu, and Josh Beckett. The A's with Sonny Gray, John Lester, Jeff Samardzija, Scott Kazmir, and Jesse Chavez. You get the point. This strategy was far from new though. Pretty much every team used a 5-man starting rotation, and you want those 5 guys to be as good as possible. These 5 players pitch much more than any other pitcher on the roster. The 2014 Nationals put a lot of weight into their 5 starters compared to their bullpen. Why 5 starters though? Who came up with that number? Well, that's just the way it is. You have 5 starters and the rest are relievers. It's been that way for decades now. The starters pitch a lot while the relievers pitch a little. There is a reason why starting pitching contracts are where they are right now. Over the years, they have become one of the most in-demand positions in the league, but this might completely change over the next few years. Starting pitching may end up not even existing anymore. The Tigers are the most recent example of a possible change in the ideal pitching staff. Heading into the season, the Tigers were going in with a solid 5 starters. They weren't on the same level as the 2014 Nationals, but the idea was there. Tarik Skubal led the way as the ace, Jack Flaherty and Kenta Maeda followed him as 2 solid veterans, then 2 young guys that could make a difference in the back end in Casey Mize and Reese Olson. Things didn't go right for the Tigers in the first half though, and by the time they got to the trade deadline, they were looking into the future. They traded away Jack Flaherty, who was dominating in the early part of 2024, to the Dodgers for 2 prospects who could make an impact in the coming years. That is one of the arms out. Kenta Maeda did not perform how the Tigers had hoped, and he was demoted from the rotation to the bullpen in an attempt to salvage some value out of him. That is 2 arms out. Casey Mize went down with a hamstring strain on July 3rd, and it held him out for over a month and a half. That is 3 arms down. Not long after, Reese Olson headed to the IL with a shoulder strain. Now 4 of the members of the original starting rotation are gone when August 1st rolled around. It was here when they were 7 games under 500 and had a 1% chance to make the playoffs. There were just 2 months left to play. They were sellers at the trade deadline. They had a ton of key injuries. Essentially, their season was over. Here is the list of names they had to work with on the pitching side. In the past 2 months, this has been the best pitching staff in the league in terms of run prevention. They have the lowest ERA in this time span. This is obviously very surprising considering most of these names don't scream best pitching staff in the league, but they defied the odds and the numbers don't lie, so just how did they pull this off? Here's a graph of all of the Tigers' starts since August 1st. You may notice that something is off, and that something is the amount of innings that starters are pitching. There's an alarming amount of starts that are going 3 innings or less. Normally, you would consider this a bad thing. You want your starting pitcher to go 6-7 innings so you don't have to grind through too many bullpen arms. This isn't an alarming thing in this case, however, as it's one of the keys to the Tigers' recent success. It's no secret that the Tigers have not relied on their starting pitching during this run. If you look at the starting pitcher usage since August 1st, the Tigers are by far the lowest team, averaging under 4 innings per start. If you saw this 10 years ago, this would be considered an absolute disaster. A team cannot possibly function with a starting rotation this poor, but this is by design. If we go back to the innings graph, you can see that most of the pitchers who are in the red are relievers. For a bulk of this run, the Tigers used just two traditional starters in Tarik Skubal and Kader Montero, essentially running a two-man rotation rather than the traditional five. In between, they had to piece together what they could. The Tigers' starts during this stretch were spread out to a lot of different pitchers. 11 different pitchers started for them. Most of these guys are considered to be openers. A relief pitcher who typically pitches 1 or 2 innings pitches at the start of the game rather than after the starter. The Tigers still had pitchers pitch bulk innings like a starter would. Kenta Maeda was still racking up the innings in the bullpen in what we call the follower role, the pitcher who follows the opener. Brian Sammons and Brant Herter also saw significant innings coming out of the bullpen. You can see the difference this strategy made on Kenta Maeda. He was originally removed from the starting rotation because of his poor performance, but when he pitched with an opener in front of him, he became much more productive. What's the reasoning behind this? We can look at the numbers from when he started games, and the numbers that I really want to focus on are the TTO numbers. TTO means times through the order, meaning how well did Maeda perform the first time he faced the lineup compared to the second and third times that he faced those same hitters. You can see that he found the most success when he went through the lineup the first time, and when the hitters came around for their second and third at-bats against him, the numbers got worse. Maeda is not alone in this issue. League-wide averages follow a similar pattern. Here's a graph of the league-wide ERA against the lineup the first, second, and third time. In 2024, the first time through the order, pitchers have an ERA of 4.04. The second time through, it increases by 15 points to 4.19. It increases even further when you go to the third time through the order, which is all the way up at 4.39. It's pretty clear that more times through the order is associated with higher ERAs and worse run prevention from pitchers. You can observe this same pattern when you look at strikeout rate. The first time through, pitchers are striking out hitters at a 23.8% clip on average. The second time, it drops to 21.3%. It drops below 20 to 19.7 when the starter goes a third time through the order. The longer the starter stays in the game, the more contact the hitters make off of him on average. Now let's look at one final stat, OPS. When hitters face the starter the first time, their OPS is below 700 at 696 on average. The second time, they get a 33-point boost up to 729. The third time is a 34-point increase to 763. For reference, Nico Hoerner has an OPS of 693 in 2024. Hoerner is a defense-first middle infielder that doesn't provide much value at the plate. Jazz Chisholm this year has an OPS of 761. So essentially you go from a Nico Hoerner level hitter to a Jazz Chisholm level hitter when a hitter is seeing his starting pitcher for the third time. Here's all of this in table form. It's pretty clear the more a hitter sees a pitcher in a given game, the better that hitter will do on average. This makes sense logically. For one, the hitter has seen the pitcher's stuff already and will have a much better idea of what to expect. This is especially true if the starter only throws 2 or 3 pitches. Another reason is that the starter is obviously not going to be in the same shape that they were in the first or second inning. Yes, some starters have more stamina and some have less, but for the most part, the stuff is going to decline slightly as the game goes on. So what does all this have to do with the Tigers in this new pitching strategy? Going back to Kenta Maeda, this explains why having an opener for him was so beneficial. The biggest point is that he doesn't face the same hitters 3 times or even 2 times as much anymore. Also, the opener faces the top of the order at the start of the game, meaning that Maeda probably will only have to face those guys once, maybe twice throughout his outing. Obviously, the more dangerous hitters are usually hitting towards the top of the order. Tigers manager AJ Hinch looks at it like this. He gets to pick who the leadoff hitter is, not the opposing manager. He gets to choose the first hitter that the starter faces, regardless of what the opposing manager sets as his lineup. Having the opener, a pitcher who's designed to pitch 1 or 2 innings at max effort, face the most dangerous hitters is a smart idea. That way you make the job of a guy like Kenta Maeda much easier. The opener wasn't the only change they made. They also pulled their starters/followers early. Whoever was pitching the bulk innings got both ends of their outing basically trimmed off. This is what the Tigers focused on. They didn't let hitters see the same pitchers multiple times in the same game, and they especially didn't let the great hitters see the same pitchers multiple times. They didn't just do this with Maeda either, they did it with other pitchers as well. Brant Herter, Brian Sammons, and Ty Madden all thrived in this role. These are guys that you probably never even heard of if you aren't a Tigers fan. With this strategy, however, the Tigers have gotten a lot of value out of them. When you compare the usages of these pitchers to the 2014 Nationals, you can see that there is a much different distribution of innings. The Nationals have a sharp drop-off when you transition from the rotation to the bullpen. The Tigers, on the other hand, have a smoother decline. The line between a starter and reliever is becoming much more blurry. The Tigers aren't alone in this new wave of pitching orientation. The Rays put the rest of the league onto this kind of thinking in 2018. Over the past few seasons, it's turned from a gimmicky trend into a legitimate way to win games. In fact, this strategy has led to some of the best pitching staffs in the league in 2024. The 4 best pitching staffs by ERA Plus are the Atlanta Braves, Milwaukee Brewers, Cleveland Guardians, and Detroit Tigers. 3 of these teams are in the bottom 8 in terms of starting pitcher usage, and it isn't a coincidence that these 3 teams are the 3 most surprisingly successful teams in the league this year. When you look at these 3 teams going into the year, a lot of people were concerned about their pitching staffs. Milwaukee traded away Corbin Burnes, Brandon Woodruff was out for the year with a shoulder injury, the Guardians had a thin rotation as is, then Shane Bieber had to get Tommy John surgery after just 2 starts, and the Tigers, of course, well, we already talked about them. The Brewers and Guardians didn't use the opener technique to the degree that the Tigers did, but the one thing that they did do was limit the amount of hitters that their starter faced, which is the overall trend that we see. The ultimate goal is to optimize pitching performance by minimizing repetitive matchups throughout a game. When you do this, you begin to realize that starting pitchers are much less valuable than we previously thought, and it's a big reason why these 3 teams surprised us so much this year. This strategy lets them outplay the talent that they have on their team, or at least the talent that we evaluate them to have. Major league teams are also making this observation. Starting pitcher usage has declined heavily since 2014. It has decreased by almost a whole inning in 10 years. Starting pitchers are being used less, while relief pitchers have seen the highest usage that we've ever seen. And we see this largely in the smaller market teams, like the Guardians, Rays, and Brewers. This isn't a surprise since top relief pitchers are much cheaper than the top starters. It's actually not even close. When you look at the top 30 contracts from each position, starting pitchers are over 2.5 times more expensive than their reliever counterparts. When your payroll is under $120 million, you just aren't going to be able to afford the top starting pitchers, which is the biggest reason why the Brewers traded Corbin Burnes this past offseason. A good reliever is much easier to find than a good starter, which is one of the biggest reasons why teams are using this strategy. Where is all this heading though? What does the future of pitching look like? If we take a 9-inning game, traditionally it would look something like this, where the starter goes 6 innings, then 3 arms from the bullpen come in after. This is cool and all, but going 6 innings means that the starter is going to have to face the top of the lineup 3 times through. Not a good thing. Now, some starting pitchers you'd be fine with that, your Tarik Skubals, your Garrett Coles of the world, but obviously teams aren't going to be rolling in a surplus of those types of pitchers. You don't want your number 3, 4, or 5 starter facing Juan Soto and Aaron Judge 3 times through. It's just statistically a recipe for disaster. Most games these days are starting to look like this, where the starter gets pulled much earlier even if his pitch count is low and he's pitching particularly well. Putting an opener at the front of the line, though, could allow the follower to stay in a little longer. Facing the back half of the lineup a third time is not as big of a deal as facing the top of the lineup. The follower will start his outing most likely somewhere between the 4th and 7th hitter. That means the first hitter that he will face for a third time is also going to be the 4th or 7th hitter, not the 1, 2, or 3 guys. This is what AJ Hinch was referring to when he said he gets to set the opposing team's leadoff hitter, not the other manager. A more extreme idea would be something like this. There are no starting pitchers anymore. Every pitcher goes around 3 innings. That would pretty much guarantee no third time through the orders, but this would change the entire structure of a team. There would be no starting pitchers. There would be no relief pitchers. The whole staff would be full of a bunch of guys that could throw 50-ish pitches to go high effort for 3 innings. Now, is something like this going to happen in the majors? Maybe, but probably not anytime soon, although from what we can see, the league is slowly heading in this direction. From a team building perspective, starting pitchers are a risky investment. The amount of arm injuries that starting pitchers get these days is alarming. Relievers haven't had as many of those serious arm injuries, plus they're a lot cheaper, so the investment is a lot less riskier. Having starters face less batters will result in them throwing less pitches, which could reduce the probability of a serious arm injury. Teams are obviously searching for a way to prevent these injuries, and this might just be the best way to do it. It just adds to the possible value that this strategy provides. And it starts to paint the picture of what the future of MLB pitching could look like. As the Detroit Tigers continue their improbable journey, it's clear that their innovative pitching strategy has made a huge impact. Despite losing key players, the team has defied the odds and emerged as one of the best in the league. This turnaround isn't just a fluke, it's a testament to the effectiveness of their new approach, which is quickly gaining traction across Major League Baseball. With several of the best pitching staffs in the league implementing this strategy, it begs the question, how long until starting pitchers are completely out of the league? As other teams begin to buy into this strategy, the landscape of baseball pitching is set to evolve, and we might not be far off from a world where starting pitchers don't exist. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.